Public key infrastructure exists to solve a fundamental problem in secure systems: how to establish trust in identities at scale without requiring every participant to share secrets in advance. When systems need to communicate securely, they must know who they are talking to and whether the cryptographic keys they see actually belong to that identity. Public key infrastructure provides the framework for making that determination by binding identities to cryptographic keys in a way that can be verified by others. This allows secure communication to extend beyond small, closed groups and into large, distributed environments like enterprises, cloud platforms, and the public internet. Without this structure, encryption would still exist, but trust would remain local, manual, and fragile. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISS books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A digital certificate is the basic unit of this trust framework, and it packages identity information together with a public cryptographic key. The certificate asserts that a specific key belongs to a specific subject, such as a server, a service, a user, or an organization. This assertion is not trusted simply because it is stated, but because it is cryptographically signed by an authority that others already trust. The certificate format allows systems to exchange identity and key material in a standardized way that can be processed automatically. When a system presents a certificate, it is effectively saying, "This is who I am, and here is the key you can use to communicate with me securely." Certificate authorities are the entities responsible for issuing digital certificates after performing defined identity verification checks. The level of verification varies depending on the certificate type and intended use, ranging from basic control over a domain name to more rigorous validation of organizational existence and authority. The critical point is that the certificate authority vouches for the binding between identity and key, and that vouching is expressed through a digital signature. Other systems trust the certificate not because they know the subject personally, but because they trust the authority that signed it. This model scales trust by centralizing verification into authorities rather than requiring every system to verify every other system independently. Trust chains are what allow this model to function hierarchically rather than as a flat collection of individual trust decisions. A trust chain links a leaf certificate, which is the certificate used directly by a system, to a trusted root certificate authority through one or more intermediate certificates. Each certificate in the chain is signed by the next authority up, creating a verifiable path back to a root that the system already trusts. This means a system does not need to know or trust every certificate authority in the world directly. It only needs to trust a small set of roots and validate chains that lead back to them. Intermediate certificate authorities exist to reduce risk and operational exposure by separating root authorities from frequent issuance activity. Root certificate authorities are highly sensitive because trust in them underpins large portions of the ecosystem, so they are typically kept offline or used very rarely. Intermediates handle the day-to-day work of issuing and managing certificates while inheriting trust from the root above them. If an intermediate authority is compromised or misused, its certificates can be revoked without invalidating the entire root. This layered approach mirrors other security designs where high-value assets are isolated and protected by limiting how often they are exposed. Certificates contain structured fields that define how and when they can be used, and these fields are essential for enforcing correct behavior. The subject identifies the entity the certificate represents, while the issuer identifies the authority that signed it. Validity periods define when the certificate becomes usable and when it expires, limiting how long a key can be trusted without renewal. Key usage and extended usage fields restrict what the key may be used for, such as encryption, signing, or authentication. These constraints prevent certificates from being repurposed in unintended ways, which would otherwise weaken the trust model. When a system encounters a certificate, it performs validation checks to decide whether that certificate should be trusted for the requested operation. Validation includes verifying the cryptographic signature to ensure the certificate was issued by a trusted authority. It also includes checking that the certificate is within its validity period and has not expired. Purpose checks confirm that the certificate is allowed to be used for the intended function, such as server authentication or code signing. These checks are automatic and consistent, which is what makes public key infrastructure practical at scale rather than dependent on human judgment. Revocation is a necessary complement to expiration because certificates sometimes need to be invalidated before their scheduled end of life. Revocation can occur when a private key is compromised, when an identity changes, or when an issuing authority determines that a certificate should no longer be trusted. Common approaches include certificate revocation lists and online status checking, which allows systems to determine whether a certificate has been revoked. Revocation mechanisms introduce operational complexity and availability concerns because validation may depend on reaching revocation services in real time. Despite these challenges, revocation is essential for maintaining trust when assumptions change unexpectedly. The protection of private keys is the linchpin of the entire certificate-based trust system because possession of the private key is what proves identity in practice. If a private key is stolen, an attacker can impersonate the certificate holder even though the certificate itself remains valid. This makes private key protection a higher priority than certificate protection, since certificates are public by design. Strong controls include hardware-backed storage, restricted access, separation of duties, and monitoring for unusual key usage. Trust in public key infrastructure ultimately depends less on the certificates themselves and more on how rigorously private keys are protected. Mutual Transport Layer Security, spelled out as Mutual Transport Layer Security on first mention, extends the certificate model by requiring both parties in a connection to authenticate using certificates. Instead of only the server presenting a certificate, both client and server prove their identities cryptographically. This creates strong bidirectional authentication and reduces reliance on weaker mechanisms like shared secrets or network location. Mutual authentication is particularly useful for service-to-service communication inside distributed systems where automated trust decisions are required. When implemented correctly, it provides high-assurance identity with minimal manual configuration once the trust relationships are established. Trust models are not limited to strict hierarchies, even though hierarchical public key infrastructure is the most common approach. In some environments, trust is established through mesh models where entities cross-certify one another, or through web of trust approaches where trust is built through endorsements rather than centralized authorities. Each model reflects different assumptions about governance, scale, and risk tolerance. Hierarchical models emphasize centralized control and predictability, while decentralized models emphasize flexibility and resilience to single authority failure. Understanding these models helps clarify why different systems make different trust decisions and what trade-offs those decisions imply. Managing certificates over time is a significant operational responsibility, Because certificates expire, keys must be rotated, and trust relationships evolve. Certificate management includes renewing certificates before expiration, rotating keys to reduce long-term exposure, and automating provisioning to avoid outages caused by human error. As environments scale, manual certificate handling becomes unreliable and dangerous, leading to unexpected service failures when certificates expire. Automation reduces this risk by making certificate lifecycle events predictable and repeatable. Good certificate management is therefore as much about availability as it is about security. Misissuance and compromised certificate authorities represent one of the most serious risks in the public key infrastructure ecosystem. When an authority issues a certificate incorrectly or is breached, attackers may obtain certificates that appear valid to large numbers of systems. This can enable widespread impersonation, interception, or distribution of malicious content under trusted identities. The impact is amplified because trust in certificate authorities is shared broadly across many organizations and platforms. These events demonstrate that public key infrastructure concentrates trust and therefore concentrates risk, which is why governance, auditing, and rapid response mechanisms are critical at the ecosystem level. Public key infrastructure enables scalable identity and secure encrypted communications by providing a structured way to bind keys to identities and validate that binding consistently. Certificates, authorities, and trust chains allow systems that have never interacted before to establish trust without manual coordination. Validation and revocation mechanisms help ensure that trust remains current as conditions change. Strong private key protection and disciplined certificate management preserve the integrity of the model in daily operations. When public key infrastructure is designed and operated correctly, it becomes an invisible but essential foundation for secure communication across modern systems. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.